Tell me a bit about your involvement in the Quebec General Student Strike with respect to that, the letter that was issued. Yeah. How long ago was that? When was the letter written? Sorry.
I think it was probably about 2 months ago.
Oh.
Yeah, it started out as basically a desire among some of the graduate students in the Sociology department here at Mcgill to be involved in the student protest in some way. There are a variety of ways that various people were being involved. Some people chose not to do their work on campus as a way of expressing solidarity. We got together in the grad club and we thought that we should write a letter to the Gazette, and we hoped that it would be published. So during the meeting, I just kind of quickly sketched out three reasons why I thought the tuition hike was a bad thing. And over time, we incorporated the comments of a few other people and kind of edited a bit, and we eventually got the support of several other grad student groups. And so far, I think it's only been published on one website. I'm not sure whose exactly, but yeah, it didn't really get picked up by the mainstream media, as far as I know. Yeah.
Sounds pretty typical to me. Can you sort of summarize for listeners a long story short abstract version
Sure.
of the arguments in that letter?
Sure. Well, the first argument is basically that various groups within society experience different risks of experiencing poverty. And youth are one of the groups that is typically more at risk for experiencing poverty because, when you're between 18 and 25, you're pursuing education, you're pursuing work, and during that period you don't really have any work experience, and typically the kinds of jobs that you find are usually going to be low paying or part-time or whatever. So it's kind of a economically unstable period of your life, and given the fact that youth are more prone to risk of high poverty, increasing the tuition rate increases the financial burden of youth, and it's probably going to have the effect of pushing more youth into poverty. The second argument was that raising the tuition rate would increase inequalities in access to education. And I personally think this is the least controversial argument that the statement made. Basically, this argument is premised on the fact that youth from various backgrounds weigh the costs and perceived future benefits of investing their income in some sort of activity. For example, getting an education. And given that youth have a set kind of income level or projected future income level, and they have a set level of family resources that they can devote to schooling, raising the tuition rate is going to mean that some students won't be able to afford going to university. So this means that if you raise tuition rates, you're going to have people from increasingly higher ends of the income distribution having most of the access to education. The third argument is that among those youth who do end up going to school, but who are from a lower income background and have to actually work throughout their education, this now means that students are going to have to work longer and harder in order to get the same education. So while they're undergoing the process of education, they're also going to have to be employed at the same time, but they're going to have to be employed for more hours in the week, which means that they'll have less time to devote to their schooling, which means the quality of their degree is probably going to be lower had they been able to work fewer hours, as was the case under the old plan. So taken together, these three arguments, they're debatable to some extent, I think, but I think that there's a pretty substantial element of truth to all of them. And some people would claim that by increasing the loans and bursary system, this could offset the negative impacts that I've just outlined. And this is true to a certain extent, but the fact remains that it's more effective, I think, to just keep the tuition rate low or prevent it from increasing, rather than making an additional step for students to supplement their income through loans or bursaries or whatever in order to go to school.
Okay. Where do you fall, or do you fall somewhere in the spectrum between tax-funded education and tuition-funded education? for post-secondary school?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a better idea to fund it through taxation, because I kind of I like the pay-as-you-can model, right? Or pay what you can. I'm sorry. I think the idea of funding education through taxation is better because a lot of people are going to school. Schooling is a prerequisite for success, or people see it that way. The fact is that for most people, you can't earn a high income or have a good job unless you have a university education. But for some people, that just isn't the case. And for some people, they're going to go and they're going to incur a huge amount of debt, and they're not going to really reap many rewards from their education. So I think it's fair to tax those who actually did manage to gain something from their education. Those that didn't get anything from their education should pay less than those who actually obtained rewards from their education. And so this just comes from, I think there are a variety of, kind of rational reasons to prefer one or the other, but, I take that point of view because I prefer to distribute risk more evenly across society, and I prefer to have risk be something that's shared rather than something that's individual.
Can you speak to the sort of, in the arguments you've presented, they're really cohesive in terms of presenting the problem across all demographics, as far as people in the lower economic quadrants. But then I think that, studies can point to evidence where, as you look at other determinations, that gets even further and further away for accessibility. Mm-hmm. Can you sort of comment on a Quebec context of that here, or is that still, because its tuition is so relatively low that it's not yet an issue, or what can you sort of speak to those dynamics in this struggle? Right,
so you're kind of interested in factors other than the cost of education that might discourage people from, lower income or lower status backgrounds from pursuing
or the combination of lower income and potentially accessibility, or people with disabilities who have a hard time even finding work during educational studies. Things like that, like contributing factors that, if accessibility for economic purposes is one thing, how do they partner up with other determinations of your ability to get the money before you go to university? And while you're there too, if you have any comment to that kind of question.
Right. I mean, as far as able-bodied versus disabled goes, I'm not really capable of commenting on that. Most of the work that I've done, or the research that I've read, is about the process of decision making among people from different class backgrounds. So there are two factors. The cost of education is just one thing. The second factor is the experience of having been raised in a family where neither of your parents went through the same process of education that you're now considering seeking, right? So the cost of education is one thing. The capacity to envision yourself in a certain institutional environment, such as a place of higher learning, is a completely other thing, right? So, and this comes back to my earlier comment about the role of loans and bursaries. Programs are often set up to, help people from the lower end of the income distribution and to ameliorate inequalities. But often the fact remains that the ability to benefit from such programs is often itself conditional on being from a certain middle or higher class location. So to take, for example, subsidized childcare in this province. This was originally designed as a program that was supposed to help working families, which is, in certain contexts, a code word for, poor families, right? But if you look at who actually benefits from it, it's mostly, people from at least a middle class background. And the reason why this is the case is that, in order to properly benefit from it, you have to know how the program works. You have to have the free time to invest in understanding how you can get your child into that childcare as early as possible, what it takes, what kind of contacts you need, and so on and so forth. So it's not just a matter of income, it's a matter of having other kinds of non-financial resources to take advantage of opportunities that are available to you. So I hope that answered your question in some sense.
I didn't know if I was framing it properly, but that's a good sort of way to put it to your question.
Yes. Do you see it effective how the students are combating and other people are combating the tuition hikes now?
I think so, because Presumably, Bill 78, was it 78?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get mixed up with 87 sometimes. Presumably the purpose of that bill was to coerce people into not expressing their political views. But that hasn't worked. I mean, people still protest all over the place. There are the pots and pans demos starting around 8 o'clock, and then these kind of coalesce into the larger demos downtown and throughout the city. As for the effectiveness of it, I think it's pretty effective. We've had the Minister of Education resign, although she states that she didn't resign because of the strikes, but we all know the truth. So I think it is effective because it has forced people to pay attention to the issue. People have continued to strike, and they're going to. I can't really foresee it ending anytime soon unless martial law is declared, which is pretty unlikely. As for the effectiveness of it, I think there are going to be, some people that say, oh well, the violent elements within the strike movement are kind of ruining the credibility of the strikers. People may also say that banging pots and pans into the wee hours of the night is going to alienate, working professionals and working people who have to get up at 7 or 8 in the morning from being sympathetic to the cause. And I mean, both of these arguments have a grain of truth to them, but it remains the case that people who are violent within the protest movement are still a minority, and if you disagree with those kind of tactics, that shouldn't prevent you from supporting the rest of the strike movement. And so unfortunately, the issue of violence is something that's used to kind of preempt debate about the wider issues, right? If you talk to people about the strikes, they say, oh, I support them, but it's really too bad that they're so violent. It's like, well, just don't think about that, Any strike that you go to, there are going to be people who are going to use it as an excuse to, break things and to be violent, and that's just what they're going to do. You just need to look past that and look at the wider issues and look at the fact that hundreds of thousands of people are very, very dissatisfied with the governance in this province, and there hasn't really been any attempt to bargain in good faith. So,
are you aware of the last offer the students made?
I only really know the details of I think the first offer that was made, because I voted on it as a member of a student group. I remembered reading it and thinking, this isn't really an offer, Basically it was composed of two main elements, the first being that the tuition increase would be delayed by a year, which is not really helpful, and the second being that a committee would be formed, a committee composed of students and representatives from the university in order to save costs around the university. It's like, well, I mean, this is the kind of thing that should be happening anyway, I can go on a long rant about the way that funds are allocated in this university.
Yes, please do.
Well, I mean,
if you're allowed to talk about it, you might not.
I mean, I don't really care. I mean, for one thing, there was a greening initiative on campus, right? So this consisted largely of, this was a very kind of like absurdly literal approach to greening the campus where they just painted green stripes on the concrete. The campus was closed off to vehicular traffic, and that has been shown to, decrease the number of people who choose to take a car to school or downtown or whatever. But at the same time, they're doing all these other things like, the amount of money that goes into, for example, landscaping of the campus, right, is huge. The amount of money that's going into kind of superficial green initiatives that are more kind of public relations stunts than something actually substantive. For example, you've got solar-powered trash compactors, right? I didn't know that it was necessary to compact trash, I mean, if you're going to do it, you might as well use solar power, but I mean, most other places just have someone remove the trash regularly, So things like that. And, you can talk about what kind of incomes people are, should be making in the campus. Heather Monroe Blum makes more than, I guess, the top executive at Hydro-Quebec, for example. Should she be making that much? The amount that she makes is roughly comparable to most other top administrators in other universities, but it is a bit ridiculous.
Do you know how much she makes?
I mean, it's around something like $200,000, and she also receives a variety of other allowances, like, for example, housing allowance, car allowance, She's allowed to have unlimited memberships to various private clubs and things like that. So she has all kinds of other non-income benefits that result in, her sucking a lot of the university's resources.
This isn't an academic staff person or anything to do with research per se. Is this what's their role in this university?
I'm not really sure. I mean, she's the top executive.
Right.
So management.
Oh no, it's great. It's like even more relevant that you don't know what she does, but she gets all those things. Whereas professors, we know what they do, and they don't get any of those things.
Yeah.
Okay, so the latest offer, the one that was, yesterday the student talks fell apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
The latest offer that the students made that the government did not want to accept had something to do with getting rid of the tuition credit, the tuition tax credit, and that would have took 2 years out of the payment plan. Do you know about the tuition tax credit, or do you have any feelings about it?
I don't really. I did some research on provincial social programs, and for the most part, we didn't really focus that much on tax credits, so I can't really comment on that specifically. But yeah, so I guess I won't ask you what it is because that will take time.
Okay. Are there any ways that you think the people, or that you would combat the tuition hikes? Or do you think people should do like any other avenues of change and opposition that you would put forth?
I think that the best strategy is to demonstrate that there really is wide-based support for this, right? People who want to discredit the movement say, oh, it's just this narrow group of militant students, but I mean, it's good if we can demonstrate that that's not really the case. A lot of students support this. Just because students haven't chosen to, go on strike and forfeit their studies in order to support the cause doesn't mean that they don't necessarily support it. There are a wide, array of ways to support the strike, and I think pretty much all of them are valid. And I think it's important for us to demonstrate that we really have support from a wide variety of people. That's why I like the pots and pans demos, because you have people of all age ranges doing all kinds of different things, not just students, children, families, older people. As you walk around the neighborhood banging your pots and pans, you see all kinds of people coming out on their balconies and showing support for you. So I think that's the kind of thing that is really going to be the most effective.
You said ways to bring this to the public attention. Are you advocating, or how do you feel about an election on this tuition increase, or do you see that as problematic?
Well,
or a public vote?
You mean holding a referendum on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sure, why not? I think that would be probably more effective than any of the efforts to have a debate about it with the provincial government. It was kind of absurd for the provincial government to try and start negotiations after implementing Bill C-78, right? It's kind of like slapping a muzzle on someone and then saying, all right, let's talk. We're willing to talk to you now. And you're meanwhile like, So we're going to limit your constitutional right to free speech, but let's have an open debate now,
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really, if you take any kind of like introductory course on unions, and if you study collective bargaining, one of the first basic rules of collective bargaining is that both parties need to feel like they're bargaining in good faith, right? And it's really not at all clear that the provincial government is making an effort to bargain in good faith. So a referendum would be a good idea, I think. Yeah.
Do you see any of the major political parties taking up the student cause and the broader anti-austerity agenda? Or I guess I'll parcel them out, mostly just the student cause and student demands. Like, if there was a vote tomorrow, who could you vote for in order to feel like you're represented as a student in Quebec?
I'm kind of deeply cynical about the capacity of any one political party to fully support this initiative. I think the NDP would be most likely to support it insofar as they're the most social democratic political party in Canada. But I think it depends on what is seen as most politically expedient by the different political parties. The conservatives focus on people who are at the older range of the age spectrum because they know that they vote the most, right? So it basically depends on whether political parties in the future see the youth vote as being an effective means of taking power.
I feel like that gets stuck in a catch-22, where, so I guess because the interesting thing observing this from out of province is that here is a whole bunch of youth power, and here it is exerting itself in the streets because otherwise it hasn't been listened to through the so-called legitimate channels. I guess there's this worry, at least coming out of Alberta, that if you have 150,000 people on strike, if you have nightly demos that go up to tens of thousands of people, and they still don't win, what are some fallout impacts that you could foresee on that?
As far as fallout impacts are concerned, it's a question of how democratic our society is. Bill C-78 was, roundly criticized by pretty much every legal authority in Canada. The bar, which apparently doesn't really speak out against anything, has come out against Bill C-78. It's kind of troubling. It's kind of troubling that rather than making an effort to bargain in good faith and to, sit down with student representatives and consider a variety of different, policy alternatives or alternatives to, funding alternatives, that the response has been to shut down debate and to stop people from expressing their interests. It's a dark kind of, what's the word? Yeah, it doesn't look good for democracy. Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to people or to people in America?
Here's what I think is going to happen in America. Tuition has been increasing at a really, really rapid rate in the U.S. For those of you who are watching, in the U.S., you look at tuition rates here and you say it's going up by $1,600. That's nothing, right? In the U.S., the situation is rapidly approaching the point where the amount that you're spending on tuition is less and less plausibly, it's less and less plausible that you're going to earn that amount back over your lifetime, or earn enough over your lifetime so that initial investment was worth it. So I think it's worth looking ahead to the point in the future where people are spending so much on their education that they can't really foresee being able to earn it all back, and how things are going to have to change when that situation comes about.
All right, anything back to the folks in Alberta?
In Alberta, keep showing support, and thanks for all the support that you've shown. And, I encourage you to express your anger about things that make you angry. And, come together as a community to talk about the things that you value and foster public debate about the things that are important to you.
Okay, one more thing. Oh, sorry. Do you have any opinion or anything to say about the rail strikes?
I don't really know anything about them, so I can't comment.
Okay.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, maybe a couple. I'll try to wrap it up too. I also wanted to hear about your personal experience as far as what's going on in this department here in reference to the Red Square rallies, or in reference to this movement.